Thanks, Sue, for the introduction. Pleasure to be here. You listen to Dustin speak, you think about all the possibilities and all the opportunities that technology affords us, and I think many of those are living those experiences. But we oftentimes catch ourselves being reminded of the limitations of technology. So some of my friends in the room know this story already, but about 3 weeks ago, well, it was more than that. About 2 months ago, I summoned my Tesla to come pick me up, and it took out my neighbor's mailbox. There are lots of things that we still need to do to improve the technology and the way that it works with human beings. The problem's been around for a long time. For those of you that have studied technology and technology and the human relation, some of you may go back all the way back to Norbert Wiener's work in the 1950s, the human use of human beings. And I think that was some seminal work for us to begin to think about, and it's actually been worked upon over time. You know, Wiener raised these types of questions on what ought to be, not what is, but what ought to be the relationship of technology and human beings, and where do we begin to establish those limitations or those particular boundaries? And to me, it raises a number of questions. These questions fall into maybe three categories. The first category is, what is the technology capable of? So is the issue a technological problem? We think about Deep Blue, and we think about Watson winning on Jeopardy, or Deep Blue winning in chess, for that matter. These were seminal points. These were points where we began to think about the ability of technology to kind of move us into the next level. But at the same time, I think most of us would agree that if we're at a dinner party, we are probably not going to be inviting Deep Blue or Watson to sit down at the table and have a casual conversation with us. They're limited to what they're good at, and they're designed to do certain things what they're very, very good at. Watson's really good at Jeopardy or dealing with the confines of Jeopardy, but would not have the power of the Google search engine to be able to manipulate a search in such a way. And same thing with Deep Blue. So there's limits based on how we begin to bound these types of things. Another problem or question we may come in, is this an issue of a question of social human? Is it a social problem? Is it one of connectedness, connecting the unconnected, Digital C and Dorothy's group? Is it one of equity and access? Is this one of privacy, cybersecurity? How do we begin to think about technology as it impinges upon our everyday private lives, as it impinges upon the social aspects of what we're doing? And what should that mean? What should that mean for the role of government? What should it mean for the role of legislation? Right now, the president of Microsoft, for example, is on the warpath saying, hey, we could legislate ourselves. We don't need government legislating us on what we need to do with technology. And that's done for a specific strategic reason, right? He's seeing that things are out of control, and they're trying to head off the involvement of legislative practices or policies that could potentially have an impact on innovation. I think more fundamentally, when we ask this question of human tech, is this a philosophical question at the fundamentals of how we come to know or learn anything? And this raises questions in my mind, of cognition and consciousness. For these technologies to work, one of the things we have to accept is that the algorithms that get built out of these technologies for us to get them to work on our behalf means that they are picking up data and information that is based on a certain level of consciousness. Well, there's a whole history of philosophical research that's been done, particularly in the phenomenological area, that says that we exist mainly in our lives in a precognitive state. In a preconscious state. Most of you right now are thinking about other things that are going on in your lives. You're also maybe thinking about the types of things that I'm saying, and you're formulating words, questions, whether to question me or critique me on what I'm saying. You're not thinking about the formation of those words. Those words are already there. They're precognitive. Okay? How do we begin to get a computer to think in a precognitive way? Is it even possible? There are those that are in the technological field saying it's not possible. So let's stop worrying about it. It's like worrying about population overflow on Mars. Like it is just unnecessary to begin to worry about it. But there are many who are saying, no, that's not the case. We're already working within this realm, and we need to be thinking about it in a more detailed way. So when I start to conceptualize this into the approaches to start thinking about this, what I think is most fundamental to all of these is this concept of science, how we begin to think and conceptualize science. And science is an interesting terminology. If you go back to, I like to think about the word science not necessarily from the Western culture sense of science, but if we could think about it from the German sense of science. German uses this word that's called Wissenschaft. And the idea of Wissenschaft, when translated into English, it means science. But to the Germans, that's too limiting of a definition. They look at it as any systematic process being able to understand or learn something new. Okay? Any systematic process, scientific, non-scientific, humanities, poems, conversations, dialogue, discourse in any way. Right? These are all modes of how we build knowledge. And the second part of that is that they think about it in terms of a dynamic process. And a dynamic process that is not necessarily about information being handed down to the next generation, but information that is very personal, that gets built as you begin to build out this, our experiences that take place. So the question becomes, how do we do this? And I have 1 minute left in slides, but the context is important here, because the question becomes, how do we begin to do this, right? How do we work through this? And my work to this point has been on beginning to think about things from a transdisciplinary perspective. So you've heard Susan mention interdisciplinary, Dustin mentioned multidisciplinary. One of Dustin's slides that got cut out has a transdisciplinary slide in it. But when I begin to think about transdisciplinary, I think about it in this idea that we've got these different areas that are operating, and we all use specific languages, thoughts, and frameworks that we use in these areas. And we can find ourselves confined to these areas. So how do we begin to think about processes and mechanisms of that crossover? Now, that's traditionally what we've done with interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary work. This is probably more of an interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary work. But if you notice, there's a space in the middle, and that's where I'm interested. I'm interested in the space in between that situates itself between the general public and what might be going on, and how we begin to conceptualize what Basarab Nicholas Shea referred to as the hidden third. And the idea of the hidden third is that there's activity that goes on in this hidden third that comes from all of our different disciplines. And when we can do something that Hannah Arendt referred to as go visiting, okay? Leave yourself, leave your discipline, and try to go visiting into another discipline. How do they think about their work? What kinds of languages do they use? How do they conceptualize their problems? How do they contextualize or constitute the way that they're going to attack their problems? And then how do they contact others, contactual work? How do they actually do the work, right? Setting ourselves away from this and thinking about the way that different disciplines do this, and opening ourselves up to new ways of understanding how different disciplines do the work. What we start to see emerge are new languages and new appreciations. So in Dustin's work, as we began to work through transdisciplinary, I give one example here. We came up with this concept called the othernet, right? It was no one discipline's terminology. It's something that emerged out of the group. And the othernet stands for optimizing time, health, experience, and reality. And it's the place that we're thinking about, the basis of where we can send all of these experiences electronically. No one person owns that term, right? It was the culmination of a language that emerged out of a transdisciplinary approach. That's how you know you're on your way to those types of things. Okay, I'll look forward to your questions.